Sometimes betrayed partners, they are looking for that reason why. And when they hear about sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior disorder, they kind of grab onto that like, oh, this must be it. Sometimes people come in and there's definitely been betrayal. Betrayal has happened. But when we actually do the assessment, there's not compulsivity or addiction there. Maybe there's infidelity, maybe even chronic infidelity, but that doesn't mean it's the same thing as sex addiction. And while there's a lot of overlap between what we might do with couples, there's some distinctions as well. So let's talk about that. How is infidelity different from compulsive sexual behavior disorder?
Well, there's no doubt that when you're dealing with any kind of sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior, it tends to get worse and worse and worse. And the need for dopamine becomes more and more extreme. And the old dopamine wasn't enough. And so behaviors worsen and worsen and worsen. And you just mentioned it earlier when you said that you're seeing in your practice singular infidelity or even multiple infidelity.
Right.
And that can really happen. But that does not show the same brain waves in the brain as compulsive sexual addiction.
Right.
It's kind of like, this will be unpopular. You know, I always come on the show and say one thing that's a little controversial.
That's okay. You're welcome. Do it.
Well, some of the men look at pornography.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not a proponent of pornography in any way, shape, or form. And yet we've been trained to be porn neutral. So I was trained that way. I do not propose it. And in my treatment of infidelity, if there's some pornography use, I've talked to them about ways that we can shut that down. We're building fidelity.
That's
and
right.
Fidelity means you don't look at other women. You don't fantasize about them. It's a betrayal to the partner. And you know, everything we do is partner sensitive.
Absolutely.
But they are able to shut that down.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And doing so, and the willingness to do so, is a huge demonstration of prioritizing the healing of that relationship and the prioritizing of safety for the partner that they betrayed, right? I mean, it becomes a really important piece of the process. It is difficult. I've had these conversations and I'm right with you. I know that this is a little bit controversial, but I've had this conversation with betrayed partners that just because someone looks at pornography, I'm not justifying it at all. I'm same position as you. I'm not a fan, but just because someone looks at pornography, that doesn't make them a porn addict any more than someone drinking alcohol is necessarily an alcoholic. It can still impede trust. It can still break down trust, especially if it's hidden, especially if it's violating values, but it doesn't necessarily make them an addict. And I think that this can be helpful as well. And you know, I know that you've encountered this as well. Sometimes betrayed partners, they are looking for that reason why. Why did this happen? And when they hear about sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior disorder, they kind of grab onto that like, oh, this must be it. But if that's not actually what was underlying the behaviors, it may undermine their healing long term to try to force someone into that box.
Bingo. That was my experience. And that's why I didn't think it was necessarily helpful to look at them the same way. In some ways, they're such different partner betrayals. You know, knowing that somebody cheated with 60 prostitutes is abhorrent and it's horrible. And yet, to know that somebody cheated with somebody at work for 2.5 years and wasn't addicted, made that choice, had another relationship that wasn't transactional like so many of our sex addicts have, it hurts even worse. And they say, what was wrong with us that you would choose her? And of course, they see what wasn't working in their marriage and assume that that's what we need to look at. And although it is what we need to look at, we have to look at first rebuilding the values, the betrayer, and then rebuild any old wounds and self-esteem issues that contributed to making those choices. And
Absolutely.
that's different than sex addiction.
It is. It is. And I've been having some conversations around this recently. One of the things that I've seen is that a lot of there's this sort of growing awareness that at least I have. I'll own it. No need to project it on everyone else. But this growing awareness I have of people who were maybe even chronic betrayers, but it wasn't addiction. It wasn't compulsive. It was more around, like you said, family of origin issues that met with cultural messaging around what it means to be a man and getting status as a man and what success looks like and all of that. And they were engaging in these behaviors, but they weren't technically addicted.
Right. You got it. You
Yeah.
got it. And so this book, if anybody's read Help Them Heal, it is a spinoff of Help Them Heal because we talk about how the IRCM model, the early recovery couples empathy model, can help begin to really talk about those issues in a relational fashion that keeps the partner safe.
Yes.
And we talk about men being betrayed by women betrayers. We talk about same-sex betrayal and what that's like,
Mm-hmm.
because culturally, same-sex betrayal is, I should say this differently, culturally, same-sex uh, group sex has been accepted in the gay community. And so that is not necessarily a betrayal unless somebody who's gay doesn't know about it, if there's deception.
Right.
And
Sure.
again, that's not addictive.
Right.
So
Right.
IRCM gives skills to help them get more safer, and to grieve and get angry and go
Mm.
to post-traumatic growth.
Mhm.
And really, in this book, I shift the thinking to, hey, how can you contribute to this marriage, both of you, as opposed to contaminate it? So I make the partner even more responsible as a team member for the healing.
Mhm.
And hopefully I do that in a very partner sensitive way. And hopefully I do that in a way that makes them feel like they've got some control. They are a team player. They want the marriage to work and they're willing to step up and figure out what they can do to affirm their partner and get affirmed. Because,
Yes.
with partner betrayal, they wonder what's real in their life and they wonder how they caused it and what they did to contribute to it. And in this book, I do say that the marital problems that were there in some ways contributed. The betrayer needed to really talk about how they could get help and work through that in a healthy way and not go behind the back.
Right, right. And so let's unpack that a little bit because I want to make sure that people hear that clearly because I think it's important. Let me say it back and you tell me if this is what you're saying or tweak it. I think what I hear is you're acknowledging the reality that unhealthy relational dynamics within a marriage can exist and can play into what's going on. And yet none of that is an excuse for going out and cheating. And there's an ownership of understanding, hey, it was on you to be upfront, to be honest, to not try to resolve it that way, but instead to come to your partner and try to do this in a healthy way.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I see a
Yeah.
furrowed brow.
No. I'm just thinking. I agree. Well, I'll tell you where I'm going is I'm thinking about the work of one of our colleagues, Bill Herring, and his problematic sexual behavior framework, right? And I think that's such a helpful. I really love it. It's such a helpful framework because the way I often talk about it with clients is so you've got this broad umbrella of problematic sexual behavior, and sex addiction is just one thing that could be there. Sex addiction or pornography addiction, or I don't really like the term love addiction, but love addiction or relationship addiction, or there could
And
be
infidelity.
infidelity's there, sexual offending is there, even though that's of its own category, and there's sexual anorexia, so all of this stuff, but it's this broad umbrella. And he has 5
Five.
criteria right? Let's see if we can do it.
5 and 3.
Okay, can we do it? We're going to quiz ourselves here. So the 5 categories are something around values. You're breaking your own values, right? So if my behavior is in conflict with my own values,
Am I hurting anybody?
Am I hurting anybody? So that's the responsibility piece. Am I hurting anybody, right? Am I breaking a commitment? Self-control conflict. Am I doing this even though I don't want to?
And am I keeping it secret?
Am I keeping it secret? And are there negative consequences? I think. And it doesn't, you don't have to hit all of those. Any one of those meets the criteria for this problematic sexual behavior framework.
Right. And again, that's a great reference because Bill is a proponent of this book. And he also, his mission is that nobody feels stigmatized.
Yes.
That labeling and stigmatizing people for their behaviors does nothing for the repair. And so if we look at it with those values and with that criteria, and if at least meets one,
right,
then we can look at the ones that it meets and say, how can we repair that? How can we build trust from that?
Yeah. What's driving that? What's underneath that? And where do we go from here? How do we change this behaviorally, internally? Yeah, all those ways. What are some of the, we've talked about this a little bit already, but let's talk about more ways that treating infidelity is a little different than sex addiction.
It's important for the couple to come together immediately and start talking about what values were contaminated, and what can they do to rebuild either those same values or different values that they can both feel congruent about. Might be honesty and trust. That might be consistency. That might be faith, more faith in spirituality.
Yes.
Empathy.
Yeah.
They get to determine what those values are, but over 2, 3, 4 sessions, they talk about that so they can begin to build a framework that they're going to work towards to get over to post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
That's one kind of treatment that is a little bit different than working with sex addiction, because, when you're doing sex addiction right off the bat, how do you establish support and how do you find your people? How do you do that 12-step work to heal? And although there are some 12-step programs that can work with infidelity, we really do more of a deep dive right off the bat into the childhood issues, the family of origin issues. And because so oftentimes that need for affirmation and attention and appreciation, which is not necessarily in sex addiction,
sure,
it did start out early in childhood. And if we can understand that and then see how it might have resembled itself in the relationship, and I'm always saying to our partners, it may have showed up in the relationship, but the very thing that he or she needed from you, they have shattered. If they needed that, they created behaviors that absolutely tore the possibility of it organically repairing. And that's why they need specialists who go very slow, who work on relational skills, that create boundaries from the get-go. Where we use more polygraphs for sex addiction, we use more intuition and faith in themselves as their guide.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've mentioned empathy a couple of times, and you've also mentioned IRCM, and most of our listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with what IRCM is by now. But in case this is someone's first episode to ever listen to, let's talk a little bit about that. So IRCM, the Early Recovery Couples Empathy Model, and we're just so aligned on this, Carol, that the relational work doesn't have to wait. that in fact
shouldn't wait.
Shouldn't wait. Exactly. In fact, we can do damage by kicking that can down the road or saying, "Oh, it's not safe and no, there shouldn't be any engagement around that." So with this model that you've created, Urkelm, um, from the very beginning, we're saying there's something. It may be baby steps toward where we're trying to get in terms of relational intelligence and connection and all that, but we can be doing something to tend to the relationship through the development of empathy. What does that look like in these situations where there's been infidelity?
Well, some of the same